Hello. Hi, everybody. My name is Lynn Serafin from TrentinoGenealogy.com. Today is Friday, the 8th of May, and it is Philo Friday. So it's Friday, the 8th of May, 2020. For those of you who may be looking at this later on down the line, I want to say hello to Judy, to Susan, Robin, another Susan, to Jim and Teresa who've come into the room. And today, and to Chris who just came in as well. To review, for people who may or may not know or may not remember, philo is a word used to describe a traditional practice of storytelling in the evening where Trentino families used to get together and pass on oral histories, legends for entertainment, for education, for staying warm, and just for hanging out with the family. So it was a tradition that was practiced until we kind of got into the era of radios. It's very precious to our culture. And so that's what I've been trying to do while we're in lockdown, when so many of us are in lockdown and we're feeling very far apart from each other. I thought it would be a great way to try to bring us together. On that note, I'm not sure I'm going to be continuing weekly from now on, but we'll see. We'll see how it goes. I'm not quite sure what's going to be happening if people start going out more. They're going to want their Fridays to do other things, but I would still continue these. Even if I didn't do them every week, I would do them maybe twice a month or something like that. But anyway, let's just talk about today. As usual, I start every week with a riddle. So let me get up my notes. Sorry if I'm looking to the side, because this week the riddle that I've chosen is something that I'm really familiar with. It's something that I've been researching for quite some time because it has to do with where my dad came from. And so the riddle I asked, and some of you are familiar with the thing I'm going to talk about, but you may not know the stories I'm going to talk about. And the riddle is this: what centuries-old mystical mystical legends are still associated, still told today about the discovery of a miraculous cross on top of a mountain? Now, those of you who know me or who have come to some of my other podcasts, you may have heard me talk about this before. I'm talking, of course, about what is known as the Santa Croce del Bleggio, which means the Holy Cross of Bleggio. I'll come back to that in a little while when I talk about where this kind of comes down to today. But the story starts back in the 1600s. Now, on some of my other podcasts, I've talked about this particular cross. It is an actual physical cross. This particular cross has a lot of stories around miraculous healings and things like that. I've told you a bit about some of those over the summer last year when I was talking about ex voto. And I'm not going to talk about this today. I'm going to talk about something else. I'm going to talk about some of the stories around its discovery, which I think are equally interesting, if not, well, they're equally interesting anyway. So the period of time we're looking at is in the early 1600s. In fact, the cross, the first time we started hearing about this cross, and I'll tell you what the cross is and where it was, the first time we started hearing about it is around 1620. So we're talking 400 years ago. Okay, so where did it appear and what is it? Well, it's a shepherd's cross. One of the practices in Trentino, and you'll still see them around in different parts of the rural valleys, not as common as they used to be, but shepherds used to carve big wooden crosses and stick them up on the hills to kind of act as guardians over the flock or whatever, for whatever reason. But this was a common enough sight, so it wasn't a one-off thing. But this particular cross is made of larch wood. It still exists. It still exists. It was made of larch wood. It's very tall. It's about 6 meters high, which is like 18 feet, higher than 18 feet, 20 feet. Very tall, big cross, made of larch wood. And it was sitting on top of a mountain called Monte San Martino, which is, and there's many different Monte San Martinos in Italy, and even in Bleggio, or in Trentino, but this one happens to be in the Giudicarie, and it is the mountain that divides the Giudicarie Valley into two halves, into Giudicarie Interiore and Giudicarie Esteriore. Now, this particular cross was kind of on the side of the mountain that faced Giudicarie Esteriore, which is the area that we know today as Bleggio, and further north to Stenico and Vigo Lamazo, those kinds of places. But it really was facing Bleggio, and that is why today that area is called Santa Croce del Bleggio, because it meant the Holy Cross of Bleggio. But Bleggio is a much older name, and so the word Santa Croce came in much later. Anyway, so I said it's made of larch wood, right? So the thing is that this cross, even though it was there, it started developing a reputation for magical healings. Now, and again, I'm not going to go into those stories because those are things that I have talked about and I'm writing about. I'm translating all these eyewitness accounts, but I wanted to tell you about some of the mystical stories about the cross itself, which I think are quite interesting. One of them had to do with how the cross looked in the place where it was. In other words, when it was on the mountain. Oh, by the way, it's not on the mountain anymore. It's inside the church down in the valley. So we're talking about 400 years ago when the cross was still up on the mountains. This is sometime before 1620, because we think it was taken into the church around 1622, 23, somewhere in there. We're not exactly sure, but sometime in that period of time, it was up on the top of the hill. Now people started going up there and they started having masses up there. They started having prayers and group meetings up there. And one of the legends that developed around it was that this cross was very magical in itself. It's kind of like almost like a Song of Bernadette kind of story, where the people said that when you went up there, up to the top of the hill, they said the whole cross was surrounded by hundreds of candles that never went out from the wind. They didn't flicker. And so it was this mystical idea that this cross was magically descended from heaven, and all of these candles, not human candles, but some kind of celestial candles were there that never burnt out, never flickered, and it was continually illuminated. Now that to me is a very mystical story, but here's what's really interesting about that. Whenever I hear stories like this, I want to find out, or I'm curious to know, is there some foundation in truth? Was something going on that may have contributed to that legend, or was it just a story of faith? Was it just something, did it actually happen? Was it really a mystical event? Or was there also something else going on? Or is it just made up? It could be any of those things. So one thing that I found very interesting is when I started transcribing or translating, I'll say, the eyewitness accounts for things that were associated with the cross during that period of time. And I've told this to a few of you, especially some of you who may have ancestors who wrote down some of these eyewitness accounts back in the 1600s. Some people said that they witnessed strange lights up on the hill. Now, and the way that they describe them sound like this, that they say, okay, they see a light hovering on the hill, and then the light comes down and hovers there, and then it goes up and disappears. Now, I don't know about you, to me that sounds a bit like a UFO. It's very, very trippy to me, very kind of cosmic. Now, you could say then that's just one person giving this account, and they may have made it up after the fact to try to make things sound more mystical or more interesting. But here's the thing. When I started reading the eyewitness accounts, there's about 200 different accounts, but of those, there's a good 10 or so of people who talk about seeing lights, and they see them at different times. But the thing that really stood out to me, there are two particular accounts, and I can't remember the dates, but they were on exactly the same day from two completely isolated groups of people, some in this part of the valley, I think in like Tignerone, and some over in Vigo Lamazo area, completely different areas, saw the same lights on the same night from two completely different places and gave eyewitness accounts, not consulting with each other to do it that. Now, to me, that says something happened. There was something there. And try to imagine, you know, you don't have any electric lights or anything like that, or at least not in our culture, or in, you know, human culture at that period of time. What the heck was it? So were there mysterious candles lighting the whole place? Were there UFOs kind of things? Was it some kind of scientific phenomenon? I don't know. Is it just all legend? I don't know. But to me, I think when I read that, it just sounds beautiful. They say it's like, you know, like diamonds. The candles just lit. They don't flicker, and there's hundreds of them surrounding, and it's quiet and no wind. And that's the way the story goes. So that's one legend. I thought that was quite colorful. Now, the other legend associated with the cross that I find very interesting, and I've read several different versions of it. And one of the reasons why I'm particularly interested in it is because it involves the priest who was the head of the parish at that time in Santa Croce. The thing about the legends is that the people telling the stories, they don't remember who the priest's name was. And in fact, I saw some written literature from Santa Croce where they had the name of the priest wrong. They actually said it was the man's uncle. And the name of the priest, his name is Alberto Farina. His uncle was Adamo Farina, but he was already deceased by that time. And so the official literature that was left in the church a few years ago when I picked it up said that Adamo was the person who brought the cross into the church. Now, that isn't true because he was already deceased. It was his nephew, who was then the pastor of the church, the parroco of the church, and he is the one who brought it into the church. Now, but the legends don't even say the man's name. They don't even say that it was Don Alberto. They say this. This is a really interesting story, I think. It says that Don Alberto, or the priest, it says the priest, the parroco, wanted to bring the church into the cross into the church because people were going to see it all the time. I mean, that's what I gathered from it, is that everybody's going up to see the cross. Well, we've got to bring the cross into the church so we get the people back into the church. That's how I interpreted it. So in the story, he takes the cross down, he brings it down off the mountain and puts it in the church. And then he goes to bed thinking, great, got the cross, it's in the church, everything's done, it'll be all fine. Then he wakes up the next morning and the cross is gone. It's just gone. And he thinks, what is it? Is it thieves or something? And he looks up on the mountain and the cross is back up on the mountain, back in the place where it was. So he thinks, okay, well, let's try this again. So he goes and he brings it back down and he brings it back into the church. And I don't know if this is part of the legend or if I'm making it up. In my story, in the story I'm making up, he put people to guard it at this time, and but they fall asleep, of course. And he wakes up the next morning thinking, great, cross is going to be there, going to be in the church, everything's going to be fine. He wakes up and he finds the cross is gone again. And he goes out and he looks up on the mountain, and there it is. Cross is up there again. Now, the way the legend goes is that on the third time, because these kinds of stories always happen in threes, don't they? On the third time, he brings the cross down, but this time it says he captured it into a cage. He put a big iron cage around it, and then the cross surrendered and said, okay, I'm here, or didn't say it, but it said, this is my home. And from that point on, the cross stayed in the church. That's the legend. That's the actual legend. Now, on a practical level, this couldn't actually have happened because the encasement around it took quite some time to build, and that was actually built after the cross came down because they had to kind of reinforce the floor. And there's a lot of story about when all of those kinds of things happen. So we know that is a legend, but the thing that I find about this that's very interesting is that I think, and I mentioned this last week when I talked about the legend of Painelli and the castle, these kinds of stories are symbolic to me. And to me, I think the story is trying to talk about how you can't seize devotion, you can't seize something spiritual by sheer force of will. You have to embrace it in some way. And also that that divine will has to agree to be caught. So it's kind of like capturing the divine heart in that way, that it has to agree to be captured. And so this is, to me, reflecting the ethos of the time. And if you look at what else is going on in that period of time, which I'm not going to go into right now, it's actually quite a very interesting juxtaposition of things because, well, just offhand, there's a lot of things going on trying to quell superstition and witchcraft and things like that during this period of time. And so actually kind of talking about these things in this kind of superstitious way could have been very dangerous. And so when I'm going to be writing the book about this, I want to bring out all of those ideas. What actually would have been going on in the mind of the priest at this period of time? And how would those kinds of legends come up to in the minds of the people? But I think that's a fantastic story, that the cross is brought down, it goes back up on the mountain, cross comes down, goes back up on the mountain, and then finally it says, okay, I'll allow you to capture me, and then it stays. Now the cross is still there in Bleggio today. If you go to the church of Santa Croce del Bleggio, it wasn't called Santa Croce, originally it was called Interiore, and today it's Santa Croce because the cross is still there. So this 400-plus-year-old cross is still there. It became very popular to take it out on processions. People used to take it and walk up the hill, do a procession to take it back to its home, and then take it back down. And this went on for a long time. It was associated a lot with calling for rain, or when they were during droughts. So the cross actually had a long history after that. It's quite fragile now, so they don't take it out very often. And when they do, they have to wrap it in a big cloth so that all the slivers don't come off it. Our ancestors who came from Santa Croce, anybody who left from there, would have taken, the immigrants all took tiny little slivers of the wood. I have one, and a lot of people I know do, the tiny little sliver. And they took it with them as, well, kind of a double meaning. One, to have a piece of this miraculous cross with them, but the other is a piece of their home, a piece of their history, something that went back hundreds and hundreds of years, and that they could take with them. Where the cross originally was found is up on a place that they call now Monte Guarda, and they've, in the early part of the 20th century, they put this kind of very Victorian-looking altar, like a wooden metal grate, iron grate, and you can go up there, and it's to commemorate, this is where it came from, this is the house that it actually started out in, and it still overlooks the valley. So I think that's kind of cool. Have any of you heard these stories before? Because I know a lot of you have heard about the cross before and some of the miracles, but these particular stories about the cross coming into the church and then disappearing and all of that kind of stuff, I think that that's really very fascinating. Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about that. Wrapped in cloth tradition, immigrants taking the cross, right. Right, and so if any of you are going to be going there, be sure you see two things. One is see the cross in the church itself, see all the ex voto that are around the cross, the ex voto meaning the paintings about the miracles associated with the cross, but also go up to Monte San Martino and see where it originally was. It's a bit of a walk. Certainly isn't something that a 70-year-old priest, which he was at the time, could just go up and pick up this 18-foot cross by himself. Physically couldn't have happened. So even if he had brought it down and it escaped, he had to have gone with a party of people to do it. But have a look at this thing. I think that listening to these kinds of legends, you look into the symbolism of the legends, you get into the deeper consciousness of what's going on in the people during this era. It isn't just about a pretty story or a mystical story. It's about what were they feeling and thinking? What were their value systems at the time? I think these stories tell us a lot about how our ancestors were, in this case, 400 years ago. And I'm particularly fascinated with it. That's why I am doing the translations. And eventually, when I have enough time, I'll be continuing writing on the book on that, but I'm working so much on client projects right now, I don't have time to write. Have a think about what legends do you know about your own ancestors' towns? What stories? Let's talk about those. What kinds of stories do you know that may reflect something about what they were thinking and what their values were at that time? Next time we meet, and I'm assuming this will be next Friday, and after that I may start doing these less frequently if the lockdowns start lifting, which fingers crossed will all, all of this will go down a bit. And I mean the threat to our health and our towns and villages and cities will go down. And hopefully we'll all get to see our families again. But we will meet again next week. What I want to talk about next week are some legends around the plague of 1630. So a little bit after the same period of time that this cross was found, just 10 years after. There was a great plague in Trentino. I've mentioned it before. I don't want to talk so much about the plague itself, although I'll give a little bit of the history, but there are some interesting legends about what was going on at that time that can also give us an idea, a peek into life, what life was like at the time. And that's what I'm going to talk about next time. Okie doke. So for now, I look forward to your comments. I hope you liked the stories. I wanted to make it more fable-like and see if you liked those. And for now, I'm going to, yeah, that's enough. We're on over 20 minutes, so that's good. For now, that's my name is Lynn, and I'll see you in the room. Bye.